So, like I was saying, our lights are on red. So that is our auto champ settings for communication. We are not communicating verbally or non-verbally. If you need help, the only person you can ask is me because I need your full attention on what we are doing. And with movement, the only thing you can get up for is if you need to take care of hygiene, so getting a tissue or something like that. Please do not sharpen pencils or do anything else that would be distracting. So, we are going to start to learn about myths. I know one of the things that a lot of people really enjoy with ancient Greece is learning about Greek mythology. We enjoy the stories about like Zeus and Hades, and I know especially ever since like Rick Riordan came out with like Percy Jackson, people really enjoy Greek myths. People really enjoy Percy Jackson, me included, as I think I shared with some classes and like my advisory. Because I'm a big nerd, this is what I got for Christmas from Meilani, was a whole series of books on myths and legends from around the world, and I think it's pretty awesome. I also have, if you are a fan of like Percy Jackson, this is Aru Shah. It's kind of like Percy Jackson, but instead of being about Greek mythology, it is about Indian Hindu mythology, right? Um, so mythology is pretty cool, right? But here's the thing. I don't want us to just understand the stories of mythology. We have to understand why mythology is important for the ancient Greeks. So remember, for the ancient Greeks, mythology just wasn't cool stories. It was their religion. So that's why these notes are going in the R grape. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch this video, this crash course video. Now, we already know because the lights are red, our auto champ settings for C, H, and M. So, our activity, we are going to be watching this video and taking notes on it. Here's what participation looks like. Focusing on the video, not distracting yourselves or others. Getting the notes done as we are doing them. Here's what success looks like. That you get all of the notes written down in your grapes chart, and that you are able to focus in on the video without distracting yourself or others. So we should know what all of our champs look like. We're going to go ahead and work through that. I will pause the video at a couple of spots just so that way we can understand what's going on. So I think if we just click that, there we go.
My name is Mike Rignetta, and this is Crash Course Mythology. Mythology is a complicated subject. It touches on literature, history, anthropology, sociology, psychology, religion, and even science. Have you ever tried to make a Slurpee mixing all of the flavors together? Mythology is exactly like that, but it's a Slurpee of knowledge with no brain freeze, a lot to learn. So maybe actually a tiny brain freeze, but a different kind. What I'm trying to say is that don't be surprised if some of what you hear during the next 40 or so episodes echoes some of the things you may have heard in other crash courses. And don't worry if what you hear in one episode reminds you of what you've heard in another. We do that on purpose, and usually we know what we're doing. Right, Tote? Ancient Egyptian god of knowledge with an awesome ibis head.
We should totally remember Tote from Egypt.
There's so much to learn ahead. There are a couple of reasons mythology is a more difficult subject than some of the others we have. One of its many myths are very, very old, and often exist in many versions. So just keep that in mind when we discuss the myth during the series. If you've heard the myth in a different form, it doesn't mean that we've gotten it wrong. So that is always possible. Just ask Ake, the Greek goddess of love. It just may be that we're working from a different version of the myth. We'll try to put references to the versions that we're using in the show notes. Sometimes we'll even be presenting composites of a number of different patterns of myths. Another difficulty with mythology is that it's open to so many interpretations. Are myths records of historical facts, deliberate fictions, ways of understanding otherwise incomprehensible events, misunderstandings? We are not in a position to say. The kind of thing that scholars spend their entire lives arguing about. Along with the myths, we're going to present possible interpretations. But let's be clear, these are interpretations, not facts, in the sense that their meaning can be confirmed by a weight of evidence. Mythology has been argued about and theorized for over 100 years, and many myths can be read and understood in a number of ways. When presenting interpretations, we're going to let you know that we're doing that, so that you don't think that we're presenting an interpretation as a fact, because that would get us into arguments, and we would love to avoid them. This is also probably a good time to point out that in many instances, the line between myth and religion is blurred. And as we're going to explain in a minute, we're working with a definition of myth that focuses on story rather than truth. When one views myths primarily as stories or as literary artifacts, it allows you to enjoy them and think about them apart from their value as structures of religious belief. So when we recount stories from the Bible as myths, we're not definitively saying that they're either true or untrue, just that they're stories that people have used in a variety of ways over time. A third problem.
I'm going to pause right there because what he just said is super duper important. Okay? So, if you remember the very, very, very first thing we learned about this school year was fact, belief, and opinion. Okay? We learned that a fact is something that you can either prove because you saw it or prove because you can look it up in a reputable source. We learned that an opinion is a thought, but it's not something that you believe is true. We learned that a belief is something that you cannot prove is true. You can never prove that a belief is true. You can never prove that a belief is false. But for the person who has that belief in their head and in their heart, it is true. So remember, like I said, for ancient Greeks, the stuff that we call mythology about like Zeus and Aphrodite, that was their religion. That is what they believed. So, in much the same way, if you are a Christian, can you prove that Jesus died on a cross and was resurrected 3 days later? No. Can you prove that that did not happen? No. But if you are a Christian, do you believe in your head and in your heart that Jesus died on a cross for your sins and was and resurrected 3 days later? Yes, that's kind of the main part of being a Christian. If you are a Muslim, can you prove that the Prophet Muhammad went up to a mountain and was told by an angel to recite and write down the stuff that he heard? No. If you are a Muslim, can you prove that that didn't happen? No. But if you are a Muslim, do you believe in your head and in your heart that the Prophet Muhammad went to a cave in the mountain and was spoken to by an angel and told to recite and write down some stuff? Yes or no? Yeah. If you were a Muslim, you would believe that in your head and in your heart, even though you can't prove that it's true. In much the same way, for ancient Greeks, could they prove that Zeus lived on Mount Olympus? No. Could they prove that Zeus did not live on Mount Olympus? No. But for ancient Greeks, was that in their head and in their heart, did they believe that it was true that Zeus lived on Mount Olympus? Yes. So, one of the things that he's saying, and he's going to kind of talk more about this, one of the things that's important with myths is that we have to remember, like in 2025, when we hear the word myth, we tend to think it means a fake story or something that's not true. That's not what a myth means. And he's going to explain that a little bit more. So we're going to kind of go back.
In discussing myth is that most myths don't have nameable authors, or even when they do, like Homer or Virgil, it turns out these guys were really just recasting older stories into new language. Most of the time, we don't know who originated myths or how or why, but luckily, for our purposes here, that actually doesn't matter much. But the last problem we have to talk about does matter, and that's the difficulty of finding a good working definition for the word myth. This is tricky, especially given the way we use the word in contemporary English. Much of the time, when we say something is a myth, what we mean is that it's not true. For example, the idea that you swallow 8 spiders a year while you're sleeping.
So you can
not
add
true.
it later.
It's a myth. Not sure if this applies to Australians, though. I would wager that you guys swallow at least 8 spiders a year. Everything I know about Australia, I learned from you. Because we use the term myth to mean something that isn't true, we can come away with the definition of myth as a story that is false and not to be taken seriously. But myths have been taken seriously. By scholars, sure, but more importantly, by generations and generations of people who've heard these stories and found in them something worth telling again. Which is not to say people don't question their myths. Philosophers were writing about the absurdity of Greek myths as far back as the 6th century BCE, probably even earlier. So if a myth isn't just a story that someone made up, or a word that we use to label something as false, then what is it? Myth comes from the Greek word mythos, which means word, or more significantly, story. That doesn't mean every myth, or even the most important ones, are Greek, but those will probably be the ones most familiar to our viewers in America and Europe, at least until the new Rick Riordan series gets going. And honestly, if goddesses of love Aphrodite and Freya ever got into an arm wrestling competition, Aphrodite would totally dominate because Freya cries golden tears and Aphrodite kills people. Boom. Sorry, I got sidetracked by Greek myths. That's going to happen a lot. Just ask Hermes, Greek god of roads. So we're going to start by saying that a myth is a story, but it's a special kind of story that, for the purposes of this series, primary characteristics: significance and staying power.
So this is the first thing that we need to get written into our notes, but hold on just a second. Now, we know that a myth is a story, okay? So does that mean that every story we hear is a myth, yes or no? No. Okay, so there has to be more than just being a story to be a myth. And that's what he is saying here. So a myth is a special kind of story. Now, if Mr. Seymour has done my job as a teacher well, when you hear that a myth is a special kind of story, you should have some questions. What might a question be? If we know that not every story is a myth and a myth is a special kind of story, what would a good follow-up question to be thinking about be? Yeah. Yep. Yes, it does. So what would be a good follow-up question? Well, this is why we use our brains and kind of think it through, right? So a myth is a special kind of story, right? What makes it special? What kind of special story? Yeah, right? So a myth is a special type of story. Well, if every story isn't a myth, and if a myth is a special type of story, well, we have to figure out what makes myths special. What is special about them, right? And that's what he kind of says here. So a myth is a story. It's a special story that has two primary characteristics. So these are the two things that make a myth special. A myth has significance and a myth has to have staying power. So we need to have all that written in our notes. If you cannot see it on the board here, it's written on the whiteboard here. A myth is a story, but is a special story that has significance and staying power. So you need to get that written or typed into the R part of your grapes chart. Get this written or typed in first. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so do you have this written down? And just like before, if Mr. Seymour did my job well as a social studies teacher, you hear me say, well, a myth is a special kind of story. And the thing that makes it special is it has significance and staying power. What question should probably be popping into your head when you hear that? What's that? What type of staying power? Yeah, what does that mean? Like what makes staying power? And what's the other question that should probably be popping into your head? How is it special? How is it significant? Right? Do we know what significance means for a myth? Do we know what makes it significant? Do we know what that word means? If you're like, probably not. Do we know what staying power means? The power to keep being told. right? Do you know that for sure, or is that an educated guess?
It's so interesting that it stays as a story if you look up forever.
Cool. Do you know that for sure, or is that just a really good educated guess? So we've got some really good guesses, but we're not sure. And I will say that you all are on the right track, but we want to know for sure. So that's what he's going to talk about here.
This means that the subject matter is about something important, something about how the world works, or how the world itself got going, how things came to be, and then their staying power. These are stories that have survived.
You were supposed to pause. There you go. So when we talk about a myth, here's what you have to understand. Number one, a myth is a story, but it's important, or it's a story that has significance and staying power. Okay? Here's what significance means. Significance means that a story is important. So a myth is going to be a story that is important. So we need to get this written down into our notes. So significance means that our myth is about something important. And there are 3 ways that a myth can be important for being a myth. The first way a myth can be important is it can explain how the world works. And actually, we're going to go a little bit out of order. The first way that a myth can be important is it explains how the world got going. Okay? The second way a myth can be important is it explains something about how the world works. The third way a myth can be important is it explains how something got on Earth. Okay? So before you start typing, or I guess some of you have, but pause just a second. If you look over here on the whiteboard, I have this stuff written down and kind of give you some examples of what to look for. So in order to be a myth, a story has to be important. One way it can be important is it explains how the world got going. So that means it's a story that explains the creation of the universe, the planets, the moon, the sun. So if you, to go back to our reference about like, if you are a Christian or if you are a Muslim or if you are Jewish, the creation story is in the book of Genesis, right? So how the world got going myths explain how the universe, how the planet got here. How the world works. So if a story is important because it talks about how the world works, it explains natural processes of the earth.
Just a reminder, if you are staying after for the
Centuries,
basketball game,
sometimes millennia,